What's up, my wizards? It's Dev, SBMTG. We like it a magic, and today it's the big one, the top 50 cards in Throne of Eldraine. Let's go. Another solid intro. But anyway, we don't have much time for either dither or dather here at the beginning of the video, but I do want to gently remind you, before we jump into this top 50, this monster of a list, that a lot of work goes into stuff like this, as well as a lot of mental anguish and second-guessmanship. So if you have the time, go ahead and like the video, reward that hard work, and put me in more recommended feeds, share the video around, subscribe if you haven't done it yet, and remember, you still got like a day and a half until the end of Sunday to vote on what decks you want to see first for Throne of Eldraine Standard. They're in the Patreon poll, so link in the description if you want to check that out, but I think I'm done pitching for now. Let's go ahead and get in there with the honorable mention. Now, I've kind of got two honorable mentions this time. Just to start things off, I want to throw Spectre's Shriek up here on the screen. This could be an amazing card. It's a good sideboard card one way or the other, but the debate rages on as to whether or not it's main deckable, and I think that in some metas it might be, particularly combo-heavy standard environments. I think this might be a very good card in, although it'll never be Force of Will. There's a reason people are making the comparison. 2-for-1ing yourself is almost never good, but again, in the right meta, this might be a good call. That said, I do have another honorable mention here, and that's just the 2-mana removal that's all over this set. White gets a nice piece in Glass Casket, black gets 2 nice pieces of removal, 3 if you count Drown in the Loch, the piece that's both black and blue, red gets a nice piece, even green is in this party for 2-mana removal in this set. So I just want to put out, nice little shout out there for 2-mana removal in the set, because it would be a really boring spot on the list, and it has the potential to take up a bunch of different spots on the list, but instead, I'll just throw all these into the honorable mention. They're good cards. So good, that's taken care of. Let's get to the actual list here, because there's a lot to discuss. Now, I'll go ahead and let you know that number 50, almost all the way down through the 40s here, is going to be cards that kind of serve as another sleepers list. I've already done a top 10 sleepers in this set. If you haven't checked that out, do that. Save it to the end of the video. It's another good list of cards. But that said, these next 7 or so slots are all cards that could serve additionally as sleepers in this set. Like number 50, President Lyndon B. Johnson right here. This is actually a pretty good looking card, and we'll see every card in this cycle today, but I think that Lyndon is the worst. That doesn't mean she's weak. However, once you get to attacking with a few different creatures, she can start Lyndon, use some life. Get ready for puns. They're around in this video. Anyway, once that starts happening, you just start triggering Johnny's Pride Mates and stuff, and really going off, gain an extra life off of Angel of Vitality, getting a little bit closer to that of Johnny's Strength of the Pride 0 ultimate thing that you can do at 35 life. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with Lyndon, but at the same time, these life gain decks almost never actually get off the ground. Could serve as a decent foil to any mono-red aggro decks at the beginning of the format, but again, usually these aren't as high in power level as we want them to be, and this isn't really a good replacement for a card like Banalish Marshal. So, end of the day, I'm not really sure it sees much action, but it is definitely a good-looking card. Now, number 49 is a 3-drop that excites me a little bit more, and that's Faber O Elder. I can't put this too high up on the list or anything, but it does look pretty neat, even if you just have 2 mana. This taps for 2, and that could be worse, right? But once you have 3 mana, it's really nice, and of course, this will be sweet in any 5-color strategies, Fires of Invention, Niv Mizzet, both of those cards together, whatever. So, yeah, the card looks interesting, but a little bit narrow and a little bit fragile for what it's worth, too. So, yeah, you have Pipe Dreams of swinging in with a 5/5 and then creating 5 mana of all the different colors, but end of the day, I'm just not sure that the card really has the chops to see real standard play, but it could be a role player in a deck here or there. And number 48 is a card that I really liked the first day that I read it, but my opinion of it has dropped since then, and that's Return of the Wild Speaker right here. I like this card still, but I'm not quite sure that it actually deserves to be in the top 50. But that said, it's my list, and I put cards that I really like on my list. So this does require you to have not only a creature, but sometimes many creatures, and at the very least, a creature of relatively high power. So on an empty board, this does like literally nothing. And that's kind of bad. But the instant speed is nice, and certain decks are probably going to love this. You know, Bant decks or any other ramp decks that play a lot of like random mana dorks, they're going to love the second mode on this. And decks that play, you know, those very same ramp decks that'll get out like a 6/6 or an 8/8 Hydroid Krasis will probably like this card for the same reasons. You know, draw another 8 seems nice. So I do like this card, but again, my expectations are slightly tempered from the first time I read it. I don't necessarily always like cards that require you to have other permanents or specific permanents, or in case of the second mode, a lot of specific permanent types in play to really get the most juice out of them. But if you do fulfill the requirements, especially considering the instant speed, the card has a chance to be ridiculous. Number 47 is Wishclaw Talisman. I don't know that I expect much out of this card, but I at least want it on the list because, you know, tutors, it's good, right? Like, there are many ways to make sure your opponent never actually gets to use this, and there are other ways to construct your deck in such a way that your tutors are worth way more than your opponents. So I think that this card has a chance in Standard, even if it just amounts to a 3-mana Demonic Tutor. It's actually pretty good, so there's a possibility, especially alongside some other cards and strategies that we've got available in the format, that this has a chance, but at the same time, it's a little bit dangerous. I've come a long way since grading Scheming Symmetry so high. I think I may have learned a lesson. Number 46 is a card that I want to rate way higher than 46, but it's another one that I have, again, tempered my expectations of, and that's Ironcrag Feat. I do really like this card, and you got to look at a card like Seething Song, which is banned in Modern, when evaluating something like this. But the difference between 3 and 4 mana is huge here. Seething Song, with the right draw, could get you 5 mana on turn 1, and easily 5 mana on turn 2, and that's a little strong, but you know, the difference between 3 and 4 mana is always going to be a turn in pretty much any format, and even though this nets you more mana than a card like Song did, that extra turn is really costly if you're trying to go fast, which is the whole point of a card like this. There are some things this goes well with in Standard at the very least, but there's also plenty of other ramp decks that are capable of creating 7 mana on turn 4 and might have better stuff to do with their mana. So, end of the day, I'm not sure what the card actually does, but more mana for less mana is always good. Now at 45, we got another Ironcrag card that I think doesn't necessarily count as a sleeper because Ironcrag Pyromancer has gotten plenty of coverage, but I think that this might be one that's sort of the opposite of a sleeper. You know, it gets a lot of press at the beginning of the format, but it might not be as good as we think it is. You only get to proc it once a turn, and yeah, you proc it on your turn, and then sometimes you proc it on your opponent's turn, and suddenly it does 6 damage. And yeah, I'd pay 3 mana for a 0/4 that does 6 damage. I'd do that, but you're just not guaranteed to trigger cards like this, and when it falls apart, it's just not good to cast a do-nothing 0/4 on turn 3 that won't actually do anything until turn 5. So, again, this is one that I'm just not quite so sure about, but it's definitely noteworthy enough to land itself a spot. Now, number 44 is a card that people were pretty excited about when it first got previewed, but since then it's gotten kind of lost in the shuffle of the hype train and other like really insane cards getting previewed. So, that said, I don't think it's a wise idea to forget about a card like Stonecoil Serpent. This thing looks really, really nice. Just the best version of a card like Endless One or Ugin's Conjurant that's ever been printed in the history of Magic up to this point. It actually does shirk off a fair amount of removal spells that might see play in this next Standard environment, and just goes straight through a lot of creatures too that people are going to end up playing. It's immune to a card like Teferi, and that's very, very good as well. So I think this card might actually have an important sideboard place in the format if nothing else, but we're seeing a few artifact decks pop up here at the beginning of the format, to my surprise, but mostly due to a different card that we'll get to much later on in the list. That said, Stonecoil Serpent has a place in the main deck of all of those decks, and pretty much any other deck that needs to fill a hole in its curve. Cards like this are notoriously good at doing that, and this one does it at well above rate considering all the keyword abilities that you're getting. Or is it below rate? It's so confusing. But anyway, the next 3 cards on the list are all like Knights cards, mono white Knights cards, but they have to go on the list somewhere because I do think these will be impactful cards in Standard. So let's start with Acclaimed Contender here at number 43. I do like this card. It's an interesting replacement for a card like Militia Bugler. It's just kind of a better version of that, but it's also, just like Linden, is no replacement for a card like Banalish Marshal. It's just not, but you know, this kind of card advantage on a fairly stout body that gets you any night bonuses and triggers along the way is probably at least worth noting, but a card that I like, I think, a little bit more is Worthy Knight. Kind of a hero of Precinct 1 for Knights decks, and it's already proven to be especially powerful if you can go like turn 2 Worthy Knight, and then turn 3 get a 1-drop Knight and a 2-drop Knight with your 3 mana and create, basically 4 different creatures that turn. But at number 41, probably the best payoff of the Knight deck, period, is the Circle of Loyalty. Now, you're going to see all of these legendary artifacts on the list at one point or another, and just like the cycle of legendary creatures that each cost, 3 of their respective color. I said this with Linden. Just because this is the, the first one to turn up doesn't mean I think that it's a weak card. This is a creature factory in 2 different ways. If you're playing legendaries or pumping mana into it, pumps all your Knights and can sometimes be played for, again, as little as just 2 mana, and that kind of value is hard to find. So this is an amazing card, but it really only works in the one kind of deck. So even though it might be the best Knights payoff in the entire set, I think it still belongs up here in the 40s because there are way better cards to get to. There's a lot of power in this set. So we'll round out the 40s with number 40, Vantress Gargoyle, kind of getting back to sort of the sleepers list of the set. This is another one that people have kind of soured on since it was first previewed, but I think it might be insane. Now, first of all, just a 2-mana 4/5 flying is a mistake. That seems like a mistake to print those stats. Just letting you know up front, that's dangerous, y'all, and it seems pretty easy to enable, too, no matter which paragraph you're reading currently. It seems really easy to block with this. It's kind of a cinch in control decks, but it also seems pretty easy to attack with this, especially in the relative mid to late game, and it enables itself. There are a bunch of other cards that mill the opponent in Standard right now, so if your whole goal is to get to swinging with this as soon as you can, it doesn't actually seem too difficult to do right now. So again, card could very well be an accident. It could be a mistake, and could even work in formats besides Standard. Could especially work in more degenerate formats, to be honest. But let's get to the 30s here, and if there's one common theme in the 30s, it's lower rarity cards. You see what I kind of did there? I didn't even mean to, but anyway. There's a lot of stuff in common and uncommon in the 30s here that I think really deserves a real spotlight. Like number 39, Claim the Firstborn. This card looks ludicrous to me. It's a little bit narrow. Your opponent has to not only be playing creatures, but desirable creatures at 3 and less. And the thing is, in most decks, that's going to be the case. Aggro decks will already occasionally sneak in a threaten effect or 2, even in best of 1 formats, but a card like this looks much better for a mono-red aggro deck than a card like Threaten ever did, because you're getting it at 33% the rate, 1/3 the rate, effectively, and you're still going to be stealing a lot of really important creatures in this environment. So at the very least, I expect this to be a decent sideboard piece for mono-red decks to really be able to put their foot to the, all the way to the floor, and just like steal a guy from you, get in, and obviously the red-black decks can have a way to sacrifice the creature they just stole. So I really, really like this card, and I think that it's much better than its rarity implies. Now for number 38, another couple of low rarity cards, but you see what I just said, a couple of low rarity cards. I'm going to cheat a little bit and talk about 2 cards that I think are actually really interesting when put on screen together. I think these cards are meant to kind of go together and be compared, but not a lot of people, from what I've seen, have picked up on this comparison yet. So number 38 is Rimrock Knight and Shepherd of the Flock. Both of these are 2-mana, 3-power guys. One of them plays really aggressively, the other plays really defensively, but both of them are going to go in creature-heavy decks. Mono-red aggro will play Rimrock Knight, so it should have a spot on this list somewhere, but all kinds of white-based aggro decks are going to love Shepherd of the Flock too, especially decks that want to repeat Enter the Battlefield triggers. But if you're just using this as a 1-mana savior guy thing, and then get a body out of it, you've effectively created card advantage. Rimrock Knight, on the other hand, can create a shock's worth of damage in a way, as long as you're attacking with an unblocked creature. In a way, I kind of want to look at this as a Viashino Pyromancer that's a little bit more conditional, but has an extra power, so can get through for more attacking damage. It's an interesting comparison to make, and I really like these 2 cards. I think they're going to show up in a lot of aggro decks. Now, number 37 is a card that probably should have been in the 40s, but again, this is my list, and I really, really, really like cards like Ayara. So here she is in the 30s. This card looks amazing to me. Again, a little bit narrow, and the only decks that really want this are mono-black decks that play almost nothing but creatures, but I really, really like those decks historically, so I really like the look of this creature. I think that it's a nice little, like, 2 of 3-drop for the mono black decks, creates a little bit of reach for you to help go into the long game, and lets you sacrifice creatures to see extra cards, and that's always a hot ability too. Just everything Ayara does is nice, and in mono black, you might as well play her because her mana cost isn't restrictive whatsoever. But a black creature that excites me and the Spikes a lot more is Black Lance Paragon here at number 36. I think this is basically just a ridiculous removal spell. Some of the time, it's going to give itself Death Touch and Lifelink, and since it has the flash, you can just play it for 2 mana during your opponent's combat step and effectively take out nearly any non-flying creature in the format and gain 3 life. That's a really good rate for 2 mana, but sometimes, especially against like decks where you don't really have a use for the removal mode on this, it's just going to be pretty efficiently costed 3-power creatures, so it's not completely dead against control either. I don't think this is like a complete reprint of like, you know, Direfleet Poisoner. I don't think it's as bad as that card, even though I really did like Direfleet until the bitter end. I loved Direfleet Poisoner. It didn't see the play that it probably deserved to get. I think this card is a strict upgrade to Poisoner, so this time it's probably going to see a lot of play. Oh, but you want to see some removal on a creature though? Number 35 is Realm Cloaked Giant. Now, I really have the compulsion to put this much higher on the list, but at the end of the day, it's just kind of going to convert into a 5-mana sweeper most of the time, and you might never even get to Giant. Even if you do get to Giant, your opponent might have some removal for it. You know, it dies to stuff. So I'm just not totally sure how much I like it, but as a replacement to Cleansing Nova, yeah, it's probably going to see some play. That said, there are some Giants that people play. Bone Crusher Giant is going to see a ton of play, and you really don't want to leave that behind when you sweep the board if you're in a control deck or something. So I think this card has some natural enemies that might keep it from seeing all the play, so that's why it's down here at number 35, but it is undeniably an extremely powerful card. Now, number 34 almost ended up on my sleepers list for the last video, but I just think this card is undeniably powerful, and maybe I'm just the only one that sees, I don't know, a lot of people like Gadwick. A lot of people do, but for the most part, I've seen a lot of people just saying like the card's not quite there, or just like outright saying the card is bad. And I can't get on that train. This card seems like a better Mole Drifter, or just about any other creature you can name that creates card advantage when it enters the battlefield, you know? I did a whole Twitter thread comparing this to Hydroid Krasis, and although I think that Krasis is the much better card when all is said and done, I think that some lists might bring it down from 4 Krasis to 3 Krasis, throw in a copy of Gadwig, because a lot of those decks already play, like Mass Manipulation. They can make 4 blue mana. What's 3 blue mana? And this actually draws you all the cards you pay X for, unlike Hydroid Krasis. There's a lot to this, and I haven't even talked about the freeze stuff down ability that could just change the face of the game entirely. I think there's a lot to this card. Yeah, I do. Hey, Ziggy's here, by the way. But for number 33, let's get back to that theme of like lower rarity cards I was talking about. For Hypnotic Sprite, still sounds like a delicious cocktail beverage drink, but as far as Magic cards go, this looks fantastic to me and might actually see modern play, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, like, most of the plays in Modern are 3 mana and under anyways. This is going to counter stuff like All Game against them, and like Fairies is already a deck. This is just kind of another Spell Stutter Sprite. It's not as good as Spell Stutter Sprite, but still, you know, a Fairy that counters stuff. You can hold in your hand until you need to counter something, and then get a Fairy later. It's just a good rate, too. You know, it's a Frilled Mystic or a Mystic Snake that you pay for in installments, and that seems like a great card not only for Simic Flash, but a bunch of other interesting-looking decks in the format right now. I like this thing a lot, and I think it might see play outside of just Standard. Card's fantastic. But at number 32 here, a somewhat similar card. You could draw comparisons here between Hypnotic Sprite and Mystical Dispute, because they're both blue 3-mana counter spells that are at a lower rarity, but nonetheless might see play in older formats. I mean, this too has a chance in Modern and even Legacy. In fact, this is one of those where the farther back you go, the better it has a chance of seeing play, because like a lot of decks are blue, especially in Legacy. But people are talking about main decking this in Standard right now, because not only does this counter to Fairy, but it counters Oko for a relatively low amount of mana. You know, this is one of the few good, clean answers to a turn 2 Oko in the format right now, and that might make it main deckable enough. Plus, it counters a bunch of other stuff, wins Counter Wars, which is the stated purpose of the card, but even if it doesn't end up in main decks, it's at least one of the most solid sideboard options in all of Magicdom, so the card's got to be on the list somewhere. It looks very impressive to me. But here we go at number 31, the Royal Scions, the first Planeswalker here on the list. I think that this probably is playable, especially in conjunction with stuff like Ironcrag Pyromancer, like we've already looked at, and Improbable Alliance, which almost made this list and the Sleepers list, but at the end of the day, not quite. Really good. I'm kind of kicking myself for not putting Alliance on the Sleepers list. But anyway, the Royal Scions looks great with all of those, draw 2 cards a turn cards. It's just good on its face with those. But it's also nice with Jumpstart stuff. It might be decent in Is It Phoenix type decks and stuff. There's a lot. Like any spells deck, this will be great in. You make a case for this in like Grixis Reanimator because it discards cards. Just the first ability on this is very playable, and it goes up to a super high loyalty when you play it on turn 3. So like just on its face, the card's awesome. But it also rewards you for playing creatures, which is kind of nice, even though the second ability is a little bit narrow. But the third ability, the ultimate, isn't actually that hard to get to and could just be the kill shot. So there could be a lot more to this Planeswalker than I'm currently giving credit for, but just to make a safe call, I'll put it at number 31 because there just kind of is that much power in this set. There are 30 better cards than this, to my mind. But to end the 30s and start the 20s here, I've got a couple of cards that I want to group together on the list because I think that they're somewhat comparable and will appear in a lot of the same lists, and that is Lovestruck Beast and Yorvo at number 30 and 29 respectively. I am in love with Lovestruck Beast, although I don't think it'll work out. I don't think I'm a 1-1, although I might be. I have this theory that like almost every average person is a 1-1, and if you have like, I don't know, military or police training or something, then maybe you're a 2-2. If you have specialized training in the military, or maybe you're like a black belt or something, you could be a 3-2. It's possible, but like I don't think that any human being that ever lived is a 4-power. I mean, there could be a whole video about this. Maybe Sam over at Ristic Studies will do a thing, or Spice 8 Rack. It's not really for me, but I've had a whole theory about this since I was like 11 years old, and I could go on about it, but instead I'll talk about these cards for real and actually and finally. Anyway, both of these are just kind of a pile of stats at the end of the day, and I can't rate a pile of stats too high, especially a pile of stats that doesn't have trample. Neither one of these do, but Lovestruck Beast at least enables itself and has a lot of other good cards in the format right now that do enable it. But again, even though a 3-mana 5/5 is hot stats, that's all it really is. Same thing with Yorvo, but the ceiling is much higher on this, and it can attack all the time. It doesn't need puny dudes around to attack, so I like that about it too. It can just be like a 12/12 really fast. So even though this doesn't have trample, I still really, really like it, and in the mono green decks, it's going to be very nice. Both of these go on curve in mono green at the 3-drop slot, but Lovestruck Beast is probably going to see play not only in mono green, but definitely the Abzan and Selesnya adventure decks too, so it goes in more decks, but Yorvo just has the higher ceiling and the higher floor, for that matter. But moving on here, let's get on to number 28, Lockmere Serpent. Now, as far as big creatures go, I like this a lot more. I mean, this is much more than just a pile of stats, although if you're just looking at numbers alone, a 6-mana 7/7 is already pretty decent. You add the flash and your eyes start bugging out, then you realize this does have an evasive ability on it, and then you realize this has a way of saving itself. It's just a perfect control finisher, just an all-star control finisher creature for these Dimir decks and these Esper decks, Grixis even. I mean, name your control deck, this could be a finishing piece in it, and it's just got all the things you're looking for in that kind of thing. I think this is what we wanted Chromium the Mutable to be, and it never actually ended up being. Just a ridiculous-looking card to me, but it's a little bit narrow in its applications, and it's probably only going to be in that one kind of deck. That said, it's such a hammer in those decks that it's got to be pretty far up the list. But let's go from 3 giant creatures to a little 1/1 baby person as fervent champion, old Javier Dominguez, the world champion at time of writing. It's actually a ridiculous looking card to me. I mean, it's just a 1-mana 1/1, but it's also like one of the best Raging Goblins that ever got printed because First Strike is a really nice ability to add on to this pile of abilities, Just a 1-mana 1/1 haste is good enough for a lot of aggro decks, and this is, I really wanted to put this up at the same time as Ginger Brute. And just have both of these cards on screen together. But honestly, I think this is way better than Ginger Brute in just about every way. It's going to be really good in the Knights decks, adds a lot of damage to early attack steps in that list. And, for that matter, if you want to throw equipment on it, it comes at a huge discount, and there's a lot of ways to abuse that ability in all kinds of formats. So, love the card, and I think that it could see play outside of Standard before it's all said and done. But here at number 26, just before the halfway point in the list, We're going to talk about the Rocky Horror Hushbringer show. Those lips are freaky on this card, but the art is actually beautiful, and I bet it looks ridiculous in foil, but enough about that. It's just the card's crazy, and I really want to hate it. Like, it's going to stop a lot of fun shenanigans from happening, so thanks for that, Dad, I guess. But like, the card is undeniably powerful. Its Catly Honor Guard proved that to be the case. Even though this is more susceptible to cards like Shock and some other, light removal spells in the format right now than Honor Guard ever was, I still think that the extra little bit of text that prevents dying triggers from going off probably makes this, at the end of the day, a better card than Honor Guard even was. So maybe just Wizards thinks that this sort of ability, this mode needs to be in Standard to kind of balance things out. And it stops a lot of fun, and a lot of us kind of hate it, but it's obviously a powerful effect. But at number 25, the actual midway point here, I'm just going to throw Tulane up on the screen. I'm not actually sure this really does that much work in the Standard environment, because it costs a little bit of mana, right? But it's got like better text than Risen Reef, so it's probably playable. Even if you just play like one copy of this in your ban list, it's probably worth playing. I mean, how many like cards that cost 1 million mana are in the ban deck right now? It's probably got room for one more. So the card looks crazy, and just like a 5th copy of Risen Reef that does even more degenerate things. So it'll probably see play in Standard. But as far as like Brawl and even the Commander format at large, card's probably got a bright shining future too, so it needs to be on the list. But here at number 24, we're finally getting to another one of these legendary artifacts. It's the Magic Mirror. Now, in terms of these legendary artifacts, this kind of is one of the fairest of them all. That's one of my favorite puns you're going to hear this whole video. Anyway, this isn't like super broken or anything, and it does take a few turns to get going, but once you do get like to the 3rd turn of having it in play, it's disgusting. It's just dumb. 3 blue is a little bit difficult to hit, but in the end, especially once it has a few turns to get going, it is not going to be hard to start drawing, 3-4 cards a turn, and at that point, it might as well say you win the game. So the card needs to be relatively high up on the list. I think it's got a ton of potential that just hasn't been fully explored yet, because we're only like a few days into even actually being able to play with the cards. Number 23 is Stormfist Crusader. I got high hopes for this thing, although lower than I initially had. When I first saw this card, I was sure it was going to be in the top 10. It just looks ridiculous, right? But symmetrical draw effects kind of turned me off just a little bit. That said, in the aggro decks that want this, like Mardu Knights or Red-Black Knights, card is going to be absolutely crazy. There's already a red-black aggro deck put together where this is a huge feature because it enables Spectacle and gets that deck the kind of card advantage that it needs. And usually it can take advantage of the card advantage. That's the right sentence structure. But anyway, it can take advantage of this card more so than like mid-range control decks that need a little while longer to play out their hands. So, faster decks can just naturally take advantage of this card draw and sort of break the symmetry of the symmetrical effect. So the card is already proven in the very, very early days of like week -1 of this format to be a playable card. We'll just see if, the playability dips or rises from here. Now at number 22, again, a comparable card, and that's Robber of the Rich. This one is one that, at least over the first couple of days, the streamer event, all that, some people were disappointed by, but I still think it's a really powerful card, and when compared with Stormfist Crusader, I would rather have a card that's a little bit faster, it can attack the turn it comes down, and it's not symmetrical. Only I, quote, draw the card in this situation. And that looks a little bit more attractive. It looks like a better top deck in most situations to me. It looks better against control in a lot of situations. I mean, Robber of the Rich is probably the better card in a lot of board states. But that said, I still think that it should belong on the list somewhere close to Stormfist Crusader, because these cards are either going to be fairly disappointing or extremely overpowered, and in a very similar way. But at number 21, you want a creature that draws you cards? I got one for you. What I think is maybe the best, like, lower rarity card in the entire set, just barely outside the top 20, Merchant of the Veil. This one you might not have as high on your list, I understand, but the card looks absolutely undeniably crazy to me in more than one format. In Modern, this might sort of replace Faithless Looting, and if nothing else, it might be copies 5 through 8 or whatever of a card like Insolent Neonate, which a lot of decks already play. It's been proven that, a card with this effect, just the spell, don't even look at the creature, just put the... I can't do what I'm trying to do here because my hand's going to go behind the card once I edit. But anyway, just don't even look at the creature half. The spell half of this is kind of good enough, and it's proven good enough in format after format when we get effects even similar to this. But this might be one of the more powerful versions of this effect that we've seen at 1 red mana in the history of Magic, other than a card like Faithless Looting, for instance. And in Standard right now, this is a great card in a deck like Izzet Phoenix, and might even help enable a mono-red Phoenix deck. It's that good. It's really good in like red-black Reanimator decks, or any Reanimator deck that carries red. I've got a lot of stock in this card, and I think it's going to do a bunch of stuff. But now we're in the top 20 officially, so we're getting into the really impactful stuff here. Number 20 is Rankle. This actually sets off like a few 4-drops in a row here on the list. And of these next few 4-drops, I think this is the weakest, but I still think it's got more than a chance. I was kind of on the fence about this card at first, but actually getting to get a few reps in with it, it has proven to be really, really nice. And the fact that this is basically a charm when it gets through, you get 3 different, abilities to choose from depending on the situation. Extremely versatile and can often ambush the opponent, and that is when it's at its best on turn 4. I don't think that more than a couple of copies of Rankle are going to go in a whole lot of decks, and even then, Rankle's not going to show up in too many decks, but it's going to be one of the most powerful cards in the decks that it is in. But number 19 is Torbrand. As far as like 4-drops that specific decks want, I think this one's a little bit better than Rankle even, Just the ability to drop it on turn 4 and get the final chapter of the Flame of Keld is just nuts. Especially in Cavalcade Calamity decks where, it turns all of your 1-mana triggers into 3-mana triggers, or 3 damage triggers, rather, excuse me. That's just... it's just crazy. Not to mention any damage your creatures actually deal in combat, not only to your opponent, but to creatures they control. Not to mention your Skewer the Critics that, it's just... Skewer suddenly hits 5 damage for 1 mana. It's just... Torbrand is an unbelievable card, and I don't think it's going to see much play outside of Standard, but in Standard, it's crazy. It's relatively difficult to remove at 4 toughness. It can actually get in for 4 damage. It's kind of a 4-mana 4/4, if you want to look at it that way. So there's just so much to love about this card, and if Mono Red wants a 4-drop at all, it's Experimental Frenzy. But aside from Frenzy, it's probably got to work in a few copies of this card too, because it's just a game winner. But at number 18, we've got the undisputed winner of the 4-drop war, at least as far as creatures in this set go. That's Questing Beast. Now, this might actually be a little lower on the list than you might have anticipated, or I guess higher on the list. Again, that's confusing language, but I think this might be in some people's top 10. But to me, at the end of the day, even though it does have some really nice keywords on it, it's still just kind of a 4-mana 4/4. The Death Touch is okay. I think it might be the least relevant keyword on the card. It'll be nice to have sometimes, but the better abilities of the Trample, and especially the Haste, that's all very good, and the can't be blocked by creatures power 2 or less is just yet to be keyworded, and it will be relevant some of the time, but not all the time. That Anti-Fog ability will be relevant in only, it'll be like 90% of matches it won't be relevant, so kind of just in some ways amounts to a 4-mana 4/4, and I'm just not sure that that needs to be in the top 10, but it's still definitely good enough to fill out the 4-drop slot in a lot of the green decks we're going to see going forward. But for my money, the better green creature is Wildborn Preserver at number 17. Now this, again, kind of a pile of stats, and that's a problem with green creatures, but, Tarmogoyf was a pile of stats at 2 mana in green, and that's a lot of play for a really long time. Not as much anymore, but still. It's an iconic card throughout Magic history. And even though this isn't quite Tarmogoyf, it has the the ability to get far bigger than Tarmogoyf over the course of a game if you just pump a little bit extra mana into it whenever you play your guys. There's also a mode on this that's, removal, kind of, against non-flying attacking creatures with toughness 2 or less. This is basically a removal spell, so that's also kind of nice. This obviously works really well in the Simic Flash decks, but might even work well as a 2-drop in the mono-green Stompy decks. I mean, there's just a lot of play on this, and it could even see play outside of Standard. Now, I really like efficiently costed 2-drops that get bigger as the game goes on, so I have really highly rated this here, but I think this might be a scourge in the upcoming Standard. They have pushed this card very, very far. But you know, another 2-mana card that they pushed pretty far here is Embercleave. Yeah, I said 2-mana card because in most decks, that's what it's going to be. Because it turns out that a Temur Battle Rage that stays on all game and can even be, moved to a creature if the creature with the Temur Battle Rage on it dies. That's a dumb deal, kid. It's just a stupid card and is already, again, in the super early stages, proven to be one of the best reasons to even play aggro in the first place. So I expect Embercleave to be a much better card than I initially rated it. Now, my number 15 is a card that I have a compulsion to put way higher on the list. This was in my top 5 at one point, but when I really think about it, I can't put Brazen Borrower in the top 10. It's just kind of boring, but, this may prove to be one of the most annoying cards in the whole set. It's a ridiculous card, and I promise you that when you slap together these two kind of mediocre-looking effects and you put them on one card, it's actually greatness. It turns out this card will be very good in maybe control lists, but almost certainly like the Simic Flash list, if nothing else. There's a lot for this card to do right now, and there's a lot of different places for it to go because it turns out that this kind of tempo is almost always desirable. But speaking of Scourges in the standard environment, number 14 is Hogak, but it's not. It's actually just Feasting Troll King. But it's kind of standard Hogak, it turns out, We've already seen at this super early date a couple of decks that can play Feasting Troll King as early as turn 3. It's just not, it's ridiculous what people are doing with this card right now. And I expected, when I initially evaluated this, I expected that it would be kind of like Carnage Tyrant, but it doesn't have Hexproof. But in exchange for the Hexproof, you get a sort of ability to let you bring it back from the graveyard. A recursive ability in exchange for an ability like Hexproof. A fair Carnage Tyrant, right? No, turns out it's probably better than Carnage Tyrant because you can get it out super early. And in a lot of these food decks, even if your opponent kills it, you just get it right back. So it just looks like a super abusable card, and I've already gotten a few reps in with the Troll King, the Sultai food deck, and it's just an unbelievably dirty deck that I think might be one of the best in standard at the moment, and Feasting Troll King is kind of the whole reason for that deck's existence, so it should be on the list somewhere. Now, for number 13, it feels weird to go from, the biggest, nastiest green creature available in standard right now to Gilded Goose, but here we are. This card is so honking good. It really is. I mean, it turns out that Bad Birds of Paradise is still a good card. And if it sticks around to the late game, it can't do much attacking, can do some blocking, and that's kind of nice, but it can also just be a 3 life a turn farm for you, and there's kind of nothing wrong with that either. So the card is just super powerful, and even though it's not quite Llanowar Elves, there's a lot of situations where it's straight up better. Now, at number 12, I hate to do it to my boy, but it's got to be Garruk here. Again, that's how much power is in this set, and I think this card is probably just going to affect Standard, but it's likely going to affect Standard in a pretty big way. I mean, this is just one of the best mid-range finishers you could really hope for in Standard right now, and it fits the next in a long line of, balmy 6-drop Planeswalkers that, define the set that they're in. We got Garruk this time, Chandra last time, Liliana and War of the Spark. I mean, these are all really crazy 6-drop Planeswalkers, and this looks like one of the best of the bunch so far. Even if it requires some enabling, you can't actually plus this Planeswalker, that kind of sucks, but all the abilities on it are crazy, making more than one solidly, powered creature a turn, killing stuff and drawing cards. I mean, the power on this is apparent, but again, I don't think it's going to affect too much outside of Standard, and there are so many cards in the set that will affect a bunch of other formats, so I'm sorry that your coming back party doesn't even put you in the top 10, but that's just the way it is. That said, again, don't think this is a weak card. It's still easily one of the most impactful cards from the set. Now at number 11 here, the Cauldron of Eternity. Now we're getting down to the end of these, legendary artifacts. In fact, there's one more if you're keeping score. The Cauldron of Eternity looks like one of the most broken ones to me, and it's not going to be hard to fill your graveyard. It's just not in this format right now. On a relatively early turn, we got Merfolk Secret Keeper, Wall of Lost Thoughts, a bunch of other things. Emery, we'll get to that also a little bit later, but there's just 100 ways to put cards in your graveyard with alacrity in this format, so I just don't see it being too tough. The card advantage you get off of this is just unbelievable, and you can reanimate some truly heinous stuff for just 3 total mana once you get it going. That's a big part of it too. So just expect the card to see a lot of play in a couple of different decks. But here we are, top 10. We finally made it. I don't know how many times you've paused the video and come back, or stopped the video and gone off and done a thing, gone to work and then come back and you start watching it. I don't know, but we've made it here together one way or the other. Number 10. The Great Hinge, the last of the legendary artifacts, but this looks like the most abusable to me. Even if you don't have a whole lot to do with it, you're still gaining 2 life a turn, but it ramps you, it pays you off for playing creatures, gives you bigger creatures, draws you cards. I mean, what do you want? I mean, it's super easy to get this on a relatively early turn in Standard and start getting card advantage. Amazing against mid-range decks if you're in sort of a mid-range mirror. Incredible against Control too, because it draws you the cards, just enables you to play these ridiculously expensive cards. Just everything about the card looks dumb and easy to enable in Standard, but this is another one that's going to see, I don't know, play in every green commander deck that there ever is going to be forever. There's a lot less opportunity cost in a card like this than a card like, say, the Great Cauldron, and that's what I think edges that card out to make this card actually hit the top 10. I mean, it's just unbelievably playable in singleton formats like Commander, but again, in Standard, I think this probably has the best chance of all the legendary artifacts. Now, number 9 is Bone Crusher Giant. Now, this is just kind of a generically good card. Like, I feel the same way I do about Brazen Borrower. This is just it's just better. Mono red decks will really like this, and they're probably going to be more like red-based aggro decks that want to play this than like blue-based decks that want to play Brazen Borrower, for instance. It's much better removal. It can take out Planeswalkers some of the time and hit straight to the dome, and it's aggressively costed creature even without the spell half. I mean, just everything about the card screams Standard playability. It's probably going to be one of those cards that, in a way, defines Standard. So it needs to go in the top 10, even if it's kind of a boring pick. Just like Murderous Rider here at number 8. Of all of these removal on an adventure stick, options like Brazen Borrower or Bone Crusher Giant, I think this is just kind of obviously the best. The body's not quite as desirable as a card like Giant, but that said, this has a huge range of removal options. Going to be really important to take out Planeswalkers in the upcoming format. There's no limit to how big of a creature you can actually kill with this, and it's always a guaranteed 2-for-1, unlike Giant necessarily. Giant might just go to the face on turn 2, and then you play it on turn 3, so there's just so much to like about these cards. I've always loved, cards like Ravenous Chupacabra, Necrotal back in the day, Shriek Maw when we had Lorwyn. Just cards like this are always insane. And this is one of the best we've ever seen, one could argue. So, yes, to Murderous Rider, it should probably be in the top 10. But for number 7, we've reached the final Planeswalker on the list, and that's Oko, which has come up a lot of slots in my book. Just all the information that we have access to so far in Eldraine Standard, it looks like this might be one of the biggest threats in Standard moving forward, especially for decks that can get it on turn 2 after a Gilded Goose. That's a very difficult play for a lot of decks to beat. I mean, again, it's very, very early right now, but if any card makes those decks playable, it's old Okie Dokes right here. It's just going to be a card that looks to be almost as annoying as 3-Mana Teferi was in the previous format. But anyway, number 6 is Fires of Invention. If I had to pick one card that was maybe like the most impactful for Standard from the entire set, it's probably Fires, and I really hope that I'm not miscalculating here. There's just all kinds of wacky crap that's entirely enabled by this. It feels like a better Wilderness Reclamation in a lot of circumstances. It's comparable to that card, but kind of exactly opposite to Reclamation. Getting this plus a free 4-drop on turn 4 is unbelievable, especially if you are in a 4 or 5 color deck. It's just a crazy play. And then when you actually untap, you kind of get 10 mana, provided that you drop a land on that turn. I mean, it's just the actual advantage, the mana advantage this provides you is extremely dangerous and very breakable. And I do fear this might, at the end of the day, be the most broken card in the set, bar none. But even if it is pretty broken, I don't know that it's broken outside of Standard. So I have to wait and see on that. But at the end of the day, I do think it might be the most impactful card for my favorite format. Here we are, top 5, starting with Fae of Wishes here in the number 5 slot. I think this might have relevance in formats other than just Standard. I mean, a wish like this is pretty stupid, especially when it comes on a 1/4 flying body for just 2 mana. The stats alone make this card playable, but the ability to return it to your hand and get another wish, it's just, oh, the value you can generate over the course of a game with this is unbelievable, you know? And it's good in all kinds of stuff. In combo decks, you can put your most vulnerable combo pieces in the sideboard where they're technically safer. You know, that's historically been the case at the very least, but you can also just do the obvious thing, and in a given matchup in game 1, go get an important sideboard piece. That's good enough to have the card see play. I just expect this card to be crazy, and again, playable in more than one format. Now at number 4, I've got the biggest cheat on the entire list. I'm just going to say lands. You're probably wondering where these were. I'm just going to group them all together here because I get to talk about more cards that way. And there are too many cards and too many good cards in the set to leave stuff off this list. So let's just say lands. You know, the white rare land is ridiculous. It looks like, for most intents, a better Legion's Landing in some ways. You know, you don't have to use up the slots in your aggro deck on Legion's Landing. You can just put it in your mana base. That seems very good. The red one is awesome in red aggro decks. The black one is probably the best one in the rare cycle. You know, like, all of these rare lands look extremely good. The green one might be completely broken in like multiple formats, standard, commander, even modern. You know, the green one is absolutely crazy and might be one of the best cards in the set, period. But even the common cycle lands looks good. You know, Witch's Cottage is decent standard card advantage. The blue one looks like one of the absolute best lands in the entire set, common or not. You can play it in Pauper, that's going to be relevant. But even in older formats, you can get, like, you know, stuff guaranteed to Miracle with this, and that's pretty good. But just being able to, not only for 0 mana, but effectively a spell that is free and generates mana, you know, puts a spell back on top of your library, that's so freaking good. Not to mention, like, Fabled Passage, which is halfway in between an Evolving Wilds and a straight-up fetch land, so that's going to see a lot of play, obviously. These are going to impact multiple formats. But top 3, what's it going to be? Just pause it now and let me know in the comments what you think the top 3 is. You're probably correct. Don't cheat. It would be really sad if you cheated in that way. But anyway, number 3. You ready? It's Charming Prince. This card is just obviously bananas. A 2-mana 2/2. I mean, a bear with upside is always going to be good, but this bear has tremendous upside and is incredibly versatile depending on the situation. In the early game, it'll help you find extra lands or any combo pieces that you might be looking to find. It can both attack and block, and attack and protect. That's pretty good, I hear. That's what the meme says, at least. And it can gain you the 3 life back against an aggro deck and block something. That's pretty nice. I mean, just all the modes on this are fantastic, and obviously the last mode is the one that's the most abusable, like technically the most broken, because, you know, the first 2 are just like stock good abilities, but if you just happen to have an Enter the Battlefield trigger out that you want to repeat, or you're able to cast Charming Prince at instant speed, you could really do some broken stuff with this, you know. Just get extra ETB triggers or save a creature from dying and possibly repeat an ETB trigger at the same time. Like, it's all just absolutely nuts. And Charming Prince is going to work in the early game and the late game. You're never going to be sad to draw it. It's playable. A playable card, not only in Standard, but almost certainly in Modern too, where it's at least got the right creature type. So expect to see a lot of this card, probably forever. But here at number 2, one of the biggest blown calls of the preseason, for me at least. When this card was first spoiled, you know, I just said, maybe this is just a Brawl Commander. I'm not too sure about this. It doesn't look great to me. I am sometimes extremely wrong, and that has never been more evident than the case of Emery and Mox Amber. I was very wrong about Mox Amber. This is one of the best examples in the set of a card that actually gets better the more degenerate the format is, the farther back you go. You know, this is playable in Standard, and that's already been proven in just the first few days of the format, but this is 100% playable in Modern, and it's definitely playable in Legacy. I mean, a 1-mana thing with this effect is crazy in Legacy. There's all kinds of reasons why you, first of all, might want to put cards in your graveyard, and even more reasons why you might want to take artifacts out of your graveyard. It combos obviously well with, like, any artifacts that crack or any cards that sacrifice artifacts. You know, it's just so much disgusting garbage that you can do with the Lady of the Lake, and I expected this to see play in just about every relevant format of Magic the Gathering that we play, and I have no idea why I didn't see that at first. But number one, you probably already know what it is, but we're going to end the list the same way a lot of stories begin. And that's with Once Upon a Time. What a cute little turn of phrase there. I can't stop patting myself on the back. It's probably infuriating and insufferable. But anyway, I guess I'm done at this point. But Once Upon a Time, to my eyes, is just the obvious most powerful card in the set. I think that like the difference between this and just about every other card on the list is actually massive. This digs really far and can find you not only the land, but the creature that you might need in your combo deck or just in your mid-range or aggro deck. Find you the best creature from the top 5. You might be able to play a far lower land count if you can, help make sure you get this for free on turn 1. You might be able to go down to like 18 to 20 lands and do it pretty efficiently with a card like this as a 4 of in your deck. I mean, free spells are almost always just one of the purely like best things you can do in a game of Magic, and I think that is especially true here, where what you're getting for free is actually huge. This kind of card selection that effectively just either fixes your opening hand or gets you a piece that you're looking for in the mid or late game. It's just really hard to rate this low, Again, I think there's a huge degree of separation between this and nearly every other card in the list, and I think that it's one of the most disgusting cards that Wizards has printed in a good long time now. But anyway, hope that was a happy ending for all of you. We've gone through just about every freaking card in Throne of Eldraine over the last week, and in fact, a few days ago, we did just that. If you haven't seen it yet, we rated every single card in Throne of Eldraine for the pre-release. Just let me know how you felt about it. With the top 50 list, there are a lot of chances for people to disagree with me, so let me know down there in the comment section where you do. And like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe, because Deck Tech season is coming up soon, and at time of release, you've still got about 24 hours or so to vote in the first Patreon poll of the season to pick what deck we do first. So get over there if you haven't done it yet, and check out TCG Player if you want to order any of this stuff, because a lot of this stuff you probably want. There's a lot of really good cards in this set. So if you want the stuff, go there, because there's the cheapest place to get it. Link in the description. As a matter of fact, it's the first one. But I think I've wasted enough of your time, and we've been together for a good while now. You probably want to get back to your whatever other kind of videos you watch. I don't want to presume I know you, but anyway, we'll talk Magic again some other time. We probably had enough for now, but anyway, I think that's it. I'm actually done. I'm dead from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.